How many people here work for Microsoft or Amazon? So a few, and probably a few more who are keeping their hands down and are being shy. But you're welcome to, nice to have you here. So then we are going to do a vote. And the support guys from BSides have very kindly offered to help with that. And they will then announce the result. And then I'll wrap up and we'll all move on with our lives and the rest of the conference. So let's get going. So I started off by listing out the cloud security services. And this isn't even all of them. There's a lot of security services, both with Amazon and Microsoft Azure. So for example, Amazon has Identity and Access Management Service, IAM, and that's used to control and manage users, groups, policies, and roles. Microsoft Azure has Azure Active Directory. Don't worry, I'm not going to read through the whole list because you'll get bored. But just to mention a couple of others. AWS has Key Management Service, KMS, for hardware protection of cryptographic keys. Azure has Key Vault. So a lot of the different services, they're AWS services and their equivalent Azure ones. But there are some which are, so for example, Guard Duty is Amazon's threat detection and automated remediation and response tool. There's not really an Azure equivalent for that. Similarly, Inspector for vulnerability assessment in AWS. Again, there's no real equivalent for that in Azure, though you can use something from the marketplace. But equally, Azure has some services that Amazon doesn't have, like Sentinel, the preview of the Security Information and Event Management, or SIEM system. Azure Active Directory Privileged Identity Management is a great tool for temporarily elevating roles and workflow and auditing privileged roles. Then there's some services which are exist in both, but they're different feature sets or they're different pricing. So, for example, Amazon's Certificate Manager, you can issue free of charge trusted certificates that are trusted by a browser. The equivalent is Azure App Service Certificates cost £52 a year or £224 a year for a wildcard certificate. So that gives you an idea, but as you can see, it's not particularly helpful in deciding which is better. It's just a list at the end of the day. So I thought a different approach is needed. So what I then have prepared for this is, oops, didn't want to do that just yet, some real-life security implementations. So I thought to myself, well, what have I done recently at work? And this is not including going into the kitchen and having a chat and a coffee, but actual security implementation work. So I just thought, well, what things have I done recently? So 3 things that I did recently, and this is at a financial services organization who are very concerned about security in the cloud. And 3 of the tasks which I did, so this are, firstly, to prevent public storage. Secondly, to encrypt virtual machines. And thirdly, to alert when a service principal is used from an unauthorized IP address. So the scenario there is a service principal is running on an orchestration server on premise, going out through the proxy, so that should only ever originate from particular addresses. And we wanted to be alerted when that happened. So there are 3 things that I did recently. So what I'm going to do for each of those 3 things, I'm going to show you how I've set that up in AWS and how I've set it up in Azure. So then you'll get a sort of idea of practical terms. What is it actually like to work in both cloud providers from a security perspective? So let's start with preventing public access to storage. So you'll all be aware, I'm sure, that over the last few years, there have been a lot of very serious data breaches resulting from misconfigured storage accounts in the cloud. Dow Jones, Federal Express, Even the Pentagon has misconfigured storage accounts. And the Uber breach, which was a bit more complex, but ultimately the data was in the end taken from an S3 bucket. So there's a good reason for wanting to prevent these sort of things happening by accident or intentionally. So let's start by looking at how I'd implement this, or how I've implemented this in Amazon. So first of all, to just show you the issue, so I've logged into a Amazon account, and I've created an S3 bucket. So this S3 bucket is this one. So I've called it Security Spotlight, and got a file in here called passwords, not very imaginative. And if I was just to click on this, you'll see that there's an object URL at the bottom. So if I right-click on this and open a new tab, let's see what happens. So here are my passwords. So any of you can get the password to Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck if you're quick enough by going to the address there. It's a public address for that S3 bucket. So it's very, very easy to upload items to S3 buckets and make them public. But how could we prevent that? Well, let's have a look. So if I go back to the console and go back to S3, last November at reInvent, so November 2018, Amazon announced a new service called Block Public Access. And this is one of a raft of improvements that they've made over the last couple of years to make it much clearer that objects are being made public, and in this case, to control them at the account level. So I could click on here, and you'll see that there's this great new feature whereby I can block all public access in an AWS account. So let's see what happens if I do that. I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to block all public access in this account. I'm going to save this and confirm that I really want to save this. By the way, don't just go home and do this on your production account, because something might stop working. But it's fine on this account. Right, so I've done this. So now let's go back to my passwords file and see what happens if I refresh it. And great, it's blocked, what I'd expect. So not only have I turned off, have I made all objects in all S3 buckets in this account private, what I've also done is prevented anybody creating new public S3 buckets or uploading new objects to S3 and making them public. So that's how I would do this in Amazon. So let's just go back to the PowerPoint a sec. So these are just screenshots of what I've shown you. And what about Azure? So let's move on to Azure Storage. So with Azure Storage, I wanted to do a similar sort of thing. So the first thing that I looked at was, well, could we use Azure Policy? So Azure Policy is a really great tool which is Microsoft Azure have implemented, and it's quite similar to service control policies in AWS. And with Azure Policy, you can set rules to say things like you can only deploy resources in Europe, for example. So you could do a lot of control, have a lot of controls like this. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was an Azure policy that just stopped you from creating a container in a storage account that was public. So I did what we all do when we wanted to find something, searched on Google, and the page which came up was this page. So how can we improve Azure Storage? So there was a request or suggestion about a year ago to do exactly what I was thinking would be a good idea. And the message from Microsoft is the feedback is well received. Azure Storage team is working on the feature for this scenario. It's estimated to ship in calendar year 2019. So it's not there yet. Hopefully it will be soon. And then, we can control, unintentional creation of public objects using Azure policy. But in the meantime, I needed to come up with a solution. So what I did, well, I'll just show you the issue and then what I did. So these are my storage accounts in Microsoft Azure. Make that a little bit bigger. So I created a storage account called confidential storage data. And if I look at blobs, you'll see here I've got a container called personal data. So what I could do here is change the access level. So at the moment it is actually set to private, but I'm going to change this to blob and press OK. So it's now, if you look at the access type, it's now listed as blob, which does actually mean public, though that's not immediately obvious. So then I can go into my file here, which is called confidential. And I've got a URL here, so I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. And I'm going to paste that in, and let's see what happens. So here's my file that I've made public in an Azure Storage account. There it is. So what I wanted to do was to come up with a solution to prevent that happening, or if it does happen, to change it to be private as quickly as possible. So here's what I did. So I created an automation account. So here's my automation account in Azure. And created a runbook called Remediate Storage Jobs. And this is a PowerShell script that runs every 15 minutes. And what it does is it uses Azure PowerShell to search across the account, the subscription, look for all the Azure storage accounts, and then for every Azure storage account, look at all the containers, and for all the containers, look to see are any of them public, and if they are, then to change the access level to be private. So have I talked long enough so that this has happened? So what I've done, to avoid waiting 15 minutes, I just kicked it off manually. So let's see if that's actually taken effect yet. It has. So it's found the container, which I just showed you, called personal data, and then it should have changed the access level to be private instead of public. So let's see if that worked. So I'll go back to my object, and yes, it did work. So you can see now that we've got an AWS and an Azure approach for making sure that objects in storage accounts are private. So just going back to here. Here are some screenshots of what I just showed you. So the difference, I suppose, is that with AWS block public access, you can prevent creation of public objects in S3 buckets. With Azure, at the moment, they could get created, but you can clean them up very quickly using an automation script. So that's number one. Let's move on to number two. So number two is encrypting virtual machines. So this is a very common requirement for any organization concerned about security or with regulatory requirements to make sure that all machines are encrypted. So with Amazon Web Services, the approach for and obviously a virtual machine can have a root drive and attached drives. So the approach is to create a key in Key Management Service, KMS, and then to create an encrypted Amazon Machine image, or AMI, encrypted with that key. And then to build the virtual machine in Amazon using that AMI. And then for attached drives to encrypt as they're built using the key. So let's just have a quick look at that. So if I go to my instances in AWS, you'll see that I have an instance running in West Europe. This is my virtual machine. If I have a look at the attached volume, I can get the reference number, the ID of the attached EBS Elastic Block Store image volume, and then I can look at that volume here, and you'll see that yes, it is encrypted, and it's encrypted using that key. So that's the Amazon approach. What about Microsoft Azure? Well, with Azure, again, you can encrypt the root and attached drives of virtual machines. So the first thing you have to do is to create a key vault, then create a key in the key vault, and then build the virtual machine unencrypted, and then run a PowerShell script which encrypts using BitLocker if it's a Windows virtual machine, or dmcrypt if it's Linux. And that uses the key that's in Key Vault, which actually encrypts the secret that's then used as the BitLocker encryption key. And this process takes around about 10 minutes per virtual machine. And of course, this can be sequenced into a build pipeline. So as soon as you've built the virtual machine, you then run the PowerShell script. So you can completely automate this. So I'm just going to show you that in Azure. So I'm back in the Azure portal. I'm going to go into virtual machines, and here's my virtual machine. And if I select this, go to disks, you'll see, yes, encryption is enabled. And that was achieved using the approach which I just showed you. So comparing AWS and Azure for virtual machine encryption, both have a solution, both work very well. The main difference is that with AWS, the machine can be encrypted right from the moment that it's built, because the AMI is encrypted. With Azure, it's not encrypted to start with, and then you encrypt it using PowerShell. You turn on the encryption using PowerShell. So that's number 2. Let's move on to number 3 of my tasks at work. So the third one is alerting on an unauthorized API or service principal call. So we'll start off with AWS. So the requirement was to come up with an alert if a particular AWS key is used from an IP address which is not supposed to be used from. So again, a fairly common requirement for organizations concerned about security. So there's more than one way that this could be done, but the way which I did it was to implement a Lambda function. So the Lambda function that I implemented is shown here. So turned on CloudTrail. So CloudTrail provides a log of all activity on the account. That I then configured to send to an S3 bucket. The S3, the object arriving in S3 is then used to trigger the Lambda function, which then does some analysis to see if it matches the particular condition for the key and IP address, and then to actually send an alert to Simple Notification Service, or SNS, which I then subscribe to from my email address. So this code is, in this case, it's JavaScript. It could equally well be Node.js. It could equally well be Python. So if I look at my email, you'll see here, oops, that's the wrong one, AWS. Yeah, so here's an example alert received using this mechanism from AWS. So that's the Amazon solution. What about Azure? Okay, well, in Azure, similar requirement that if a particular Azure service principal is used from a non-authorized IP address, I want to get an alert. So the solution that I came up with there was, firstly, to use Azure Activity Log. So Azure Activity Log is equivalent to CloudTrail, and it's a record of all of the different changes and calls that are made to that subscription. I configured that Azure activity log to send that information to Azure Log Analytics. And then within Log Analytics, wrote a save search to look for that particular pattern of information. And then within Azure Monitor, created an alert schedule and alert rule and an alert action group, which pointed to my email address. So that was the approach with Azure. So just taking a look at that, if I go back into the Azure portal, go into Monitor, and then Alerts, and I'll just change this to the past 7 days. So here are my alerts. So they're generated using this mechanism. And if I go into email, there's an example email from that alert. So you can see that with both AWS and Azure, it's possible to come up with good solutions. I probably found the Azure one a bit more straightforward to do because just personally, the way that you write the search queries is extremely easy. Whereas for me, writing Node.js and JavaScript is a bit more time consuming, but there's nothing wrong. Either approach, either solution is great and works very well. So that's my third actual implementation. So we're now going to move, what we're going to do now is, rather than do any questions at the end, we're going to do we've just got time for a few questions or comments. Okay, I see one here already. And the BSides volunteers are very kindly going to go around the room with microphones. So, yeah, one there. So if one of you want to start, we've probably got time for about 3 questions, I should think, or comments if you just want to make a comment.
I'll make this a quick one. So when you're building VMs and then encrypting that, that's obviously a clean build. Retrospectively going into an estate and then encrypting that estate between AWS and Azure, have you a preference there?
Well, okay, so I think you all heard that. The difference, I guess, obviously, if it's an existing estate and they're not encrypted, then it can take a lot longer than 10 minutes. To be quite honest, that would definitely work in Azure. To be honest, I haven't ever thought about how that might be done with AWS or whether it's possible. I don't know if anybody else has, so I wouldn't like to comment about AWS. But Azure would definitely work, but it would take a lot longer than 10 minutes. So I think we had another question at the front, or comment. Sorry, one over there. We're just going to do one near the back first.
Yeah, I think the security features on both is quite feature-rich. Both platforms are very feature-rich. I think the best way to compare the security of the two platforms is to see if their resources are secure by default, and they kind of follow that sort of policy. I think Azure has done a really bad job of doing that, making virtual machines public IP addresses. I think that's kind of not very good secure by default. They're not following the secure by default principle, I guess.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So in case anybody didn't hear, I think that the comment to summarize was that you feel that one should make a choice or decision according to the default settings, and you believe that AWS does a better job of that. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I'm in conflict here. Well, one at the back, and then we'll do one at the front, and then we'll have to carry on. We'll have to move on from there in the interest of time. So do you want to go ahead? Yep.
Surely you can't have one or the other. You have to have both, even if it's backup of the other one.
Okay.
What happens if you get locked out? What happens if you have a disagreement with Amazon?
Okay, so basically you're advocating a multi-cloud strategy, which a lot of organizations do. I completely, agree with that. Okay, now we'll take that on as a comment. And last one, and then we need to move on in the interest of time and the next speakers.
Thank you. Just a question based on your experience servicing other customers. Have you seen security be a defining factor between the two clouds? Or is it a matter that you're being asked to secure AWS because they have already chosen AWS, or secure Azure because they have already chosen Azure?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And in my personal experience, the decision has always been made by very senior management without really any knowledge of security much at all. And then it's been my job to make it secure, whichever it may be. Some of you may have different experiences. So thank you for those comments and questions. I really appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to do a vote. And don't take this too seriously. We've had the three BSides, or three of the BSides volunteers are very kindly going to come up and help with this so that they can take a view. And then I'll announce the results, and then we'll wrap up at that point and finish. So what we're going to do here is, what I'm asking you to do is vote for AWS or Azure. Now, this is not a referendum or anything like that, okay? Don't take it too seriously. And you can vote. If you don't agree with this whole thing, you don't have to vote, right? And if you think that both AWS and Azure, they're both, more or less equivalent on security, nearest damn it, then you can vote for both. Nothing wrong with you voting for both, if that's what you feel. And you're going to just determine the result by looking at the audience. So are you guys ready? Okay. So those of you who want to vote for AWS, please raise your hands now and keep them up for a little while. So have you all got that in your mind? Okay, thank you. So now put your hands down, please. And now those of you who want to vote for Azure, please put your hands up now. Okay, have you got that? Thank you. So I'm going to leave it to you to announce the results.
Okay, so the winner is Alibaba Cloud. No, sorry, Amazon Web Services.
Okay, so they're the winners. So, okay, so what I would say, and we haven't finished yet, what I would just like to say is, and I hope you'll join me in appreciating, all the hard work which both AWS and Azure have put into developing a very comprehensive set of security services. So, thank you to both organizations. So I'm just going to, hopefully you join me. So well done to both. Okay. If you just hang on for a minute, just got a couple of last words. So firstly, if any of you wish to or are interested in finding out more, then we can go into it in half an hour. My next Cloud Security and DevSecOps training course is at 44Con in September. Details on the 44Con website. Be great to see some of you there. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn. I'm the only Paul Schwarzenberger working in security. You're very welcome to email, or I will be around the rest of the day as well. So thank you very much, and thank you also to the BSides.